James and Shov, it's great to see you both. And I'm guessing by the fact that both of you wanted to review the Bahrain Grand Prix from 2014, that it was an amazing race.
It's definitely right up there with one of the most spectacular of this generation, really, for us of racing. It's one that I think we all remember fondly.
Yeah, it was good fun. It was one of those where there was so many great moments of the two of them on track, and that that sticks in your mind. And also the early stages of Silver Arrow's success, which again is a period we all remember quite fondly.
I think we came into the race, definitely fans and people who watch Formula One, thinking that Mercedes were going to be quick. Did you think you were going to be quick as well?
In terms of the season as a whole, we thought we'd done a good job, especially HPP in terms of the power unit. We knew that they'd done a very good job developing that over the course of a few years. And the car was decent. The indications from testing were good. But you never really know until you've got a few races under your belt. But that particular race in Bahrain, I think James might correct me, but probably our most competitive that we've ever been. In qualifying, we were actually not qualifying the cars in maximum power, but we were still on pole by 0.8 of a second, I think. And even in the race, I don't think we've ever had such a big performance margin since then.
No, I mirror that view. The car was exceptional around Bahrain in 2014. Shov said the power unit was really singing, and we didn't use anything near like the maximum power of it. We turned it up a tiny amount in qualifying and held some back in the race as well. The car there was at its most competitive.
Well, let's talk about going into the race in terms of what strategy was available to you. A lot of the broadcasters were talking about a 3-stop. Was that something you considered?
Without question. All the guys, we go through a number of permutations before the race starts, and 3-stop was very much one of the possibilities. But we had the test data where the temperatures were much warmer. It was during the day that we were running, and you have to be very careful using that. That did suggest it would be a 3-stop race. Again, we had data from free practice, which is now more the cooler conditions we're expecting in the race. And our car looked to be at the better end of the degradation scale, and in fact, more so very clearly in a 2-stop window for our cars. So as we went in, what we were looking for was clues that perhaps the degradation we saw in the warmer conditions, or perhaps as the drivers push more, may push us towards the 3. But as we went in, the brief was quite clear to the drivers, you want a 2, but with a couple of opportunities to race each other. Prior to the race, we create plots of what we think a very simple race will look like for the drivers. Now, as I said, we were focused on that 2-stop strategy, and what we have here is a plot showing what the car on soft, medium would look like relative to the other car on a soft, medium, soft tyre. Now, if the car behind has no pace advantage, the reality is the car in front should just win that race. But if the car behind has just 1/10.5 of performance difference, which is a reasonably small amount in our world, and actually very, very possible between two teammates, you can see that they intersect, and more so right at the end of the race, there's around about a 7/10 worth of delta between the two cars. That's the overtaking delta at Bahrain. So that's why when we went into the race, we produced this opportunity for a car, should it be faster than its teammate, to have an opportunity to win. That's what that graph represents.
Well, that brings me to our first question in from the fans. Henry Cruz 1277 asking, how did the drivers then end up on different strategies?
As Shov said, we knew we were quick going into there, but more importantly, we had set the tone that the drivers are allowed to race each other. So under the guise that now the drivers can race each other, you need to create a structure where they can do that in the best way possible. The 3-stop for our car with our degradation just meant that if one of the cars was on it, they would lose out too dramatically. So you have to keep things really within the same number of stops. So the tools available to you are changing the tyre order and the tyre sequence. You can obviously start them on different compounds potentially, but there is an advantage to be on pole, being the car ahead, being the car in the lead, especially on the pit stop preference in terms of the first stop lap. So what that really leads to is the second stint tyre you can change, and you can run what we call an alternative strategy. There were 2 tyres in Bahrain, what was called the prime and the option, but it was the soft and the medium compounds. And the soft was just the better of the 2 tyres. It was around about 0.6 or so faster lap on lap compared to the medium. By running that medium in the middle stint of the race, though, the car behind would be disadvantaged pace-wise, but it'd be running its own race. So if he has just a few tenths worth of performance advantage on the car in front, he can make up race time on the road, fit the softer compound right at the end of the race where the temperatures are cooling down, and he has an opportunity to overtake. But you have to be the faster of the two drivers to make it work.
We saw how much Lewis wanted to be in the lead going into that first stop. If he hadn't have been in the lead, would you have just flicked it round and switched Nico to what Lewis ended up going on and Lewis onto what Nico ended up going on?
Fundamentally, yes. But actually, there's a little bit more substance to that. It all depends on when they overtook during the course of the lap. But yes, the fundamentals are the car in front has the priority really on what we believe to be the best strategy. And the best strategy is the one that gets you to that first and second pit stop the fastest possible. And the lead car would have got that. So in that situation, had Nico really got through on that lap 18, he would have given preference on the next stop lap, taken the soft tyre, and Lewis would have been fitted with the medium tyre.
So let's have a look at how the strategies played out.
The race really had several sections of interest. Lewis and Nico were fighting. Nico on pole, Lewis came through and took that primary position. But actually, if you look at this race plan, the entire view of the race, the key areas of this, first pit stop, around about that lap 18, lap 19 region, Lewis was struggling with degradation. Nico closed into the back of him and actually forced Lewis to come in a little bit earlier than we would have on plan on a normal two-stop strategy. So you can see those plots all converging, and then Nico staying out for an extra few laps, just extending that stint, going onto the medium tyre. Lewis is now on that soft in the middle stint of the race, and he was cautious. He knew that he ran out of tyres in the first stint. And from a driver's perspective, you know it's going to be better. The fuel load's a little bit lower, the track's a little bit more rubbered in. But he also knows he's got a long, long stint to make on that tyre. We were planning to go to around about lap 41, lap 42. Coincidentally, the safety car came out around about that time. But it's a longer stint than he had at the beginning. And you can see the gap between the two cars isn't quite where we expected it to be. We were expecting Nico to drop back by around about 10 seconds. He didn't. And really that was benefiting him on that final stint of the race when he would have been on the softer tyre. The final bit of the race is the safety car. Obviously brought everyone together. And you can see how quickly we were separated from the field. The two cars were just fighting tooth and nail every single lap and giving it all. Two different compounds between the two of them. Lewis obviously now on that harder medium tyre, Nico behind on that soft tyre, but there was nothing to determine or split the two cars. Nico had plenty of opportunity, but ultimately Lewis prevailed and did a great job and won the race.
How did the battle between Lewis and Nico change how you as a team went racing afterwards?
I mean, in that particular race, to be honest, it was one of the more straightforward ones. As you can see, there were obviously tense moments for us on the pit wall as well. We were worried that they weren't going to give each other enough room. But it was great racing. They both drove impeccably, didn't put a wheel wrong. And that was actually quite easy. I think it was more that it was relatively early in the period where we were successful, where we were dominating races. And it was more that thereafter, there were a few notable incidents where they did come together on track. We had to think about how we manage them effectively, because a team never wants one of its cars to damage another or take them out. And then also just thinking about making sure that the way that they race is completely fair. And again, that was over time. We have a document that James produces called the Rules of Engagement, that just means from a strategic point of view, we're giving them the right opportunities and making sure that the guy who's actually doing the best job on the day is the one that's likely to win the race. So this really was probably one of the races where we got least involved, I think, in terms of how they were allowed to fight each other.
But I guess there was a lot of tension on the pit wall. I know you said you were obviously having to manage it slightly. Num_1_FinFan_72 wants to know what the tension was like.
It was really exciting, actually. And, as I said, we hadn't had many races where we were up front dominating the race. So that was quite a new experience for us. We could see that the racing that was going out on track was absolutely brilliant. And, the stuff that you simply don't get every Sunday. It was great racing, and we were quite proud to be a part of that. But then you've also got that kind of nervousness that it was early days of a championship. The last thing we wanted would be one of them to bump into the other one. So there's always that kind of tension that but the drivers are very experienced. They've been racing so much of their lives, and they know how to do it wheel to wheel. And happily, it was a great result.
That was a time when Toto would stand behind the pit wall rather than be in the garage. And we saw him quite often during the race standing there behind Paddy Lowe. Toby Synox wants to say, what was the BPM of Toto's heart rate? Did you have him wired up at the time?
No, we didn't. And you'd need to ask Toto. He's, to be honest, he's with all of us that he's worried that we've got to get the cars to the finish line without any incident. I think in a way it can be more difficult for him because he's not really busy doing a job during the race. He's keeping an eye on what we're doing. He's got plenty of input if he thinks there's something we've missed or a decision he doesn't agree with. But fundamentally, he's not loaded up with stuff to do. And that can actually make the nerves a bit worse. But also, we've changed a bit how we structured the intercom since those days. So I think the reason you see him come over to us less often is he can actually have all the conversations he wants from his console in the middle of the garage now. So it keeps him over there.
Just not quite as daunting having him actually breathing over your shoulder, James.
Yeah, you can, even if you can't see him, you can sort of sense him.
I think we should get him wired up for the season with a heart rate monitor. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't think it's our place to say, but I think if he agrees with it, it would be some good telemetry during the race.
Of course. We had a safety car in Bahrain in 2014, which is fairly unlikely in Bahrain. Did you expect Nico to pass Lewis after the safety car? And that's a question in from Fraser Lloyd.
Safety car is very rare in Bahrain. There's a lot of run-off space, and whilst there's contact between cars, you can normally clear it up. Nico would have been on a tyre, as I said, around about half a second, 6/10 faster than Lewis right at the end of the race there, and right up behind him after the safety car restart. Fuel wasn't an issue, so both cars had fuel to get to the race, end of the race, obviously the safety car assisting that very much. But back then in 2014, we were a lot more simple in terms of how we were using electrical energy. I think that's the right way of putting it. We've learned a lot, as have all teams really, across the last few seasons. And when you look back to what is happening there, you can see a lot of the rain light flashing. That's indicating that the car's running out of electrical energy. And that happened on quite a few straights. And you saw a lot of overtaking because cars were using the energy in a different way. So the race that really resumed from that point onwards was who could use the energy in a clever and effective manner. In terms of did we expect Nico to get through Lewis? It's close. The overtaking delta is around about 7/10 for that year, for that circuit. Tyres are worth about half a second to 6/10. So Nico needs to be 1/10 to 2/10 faster than Lewis to make it work. That's tough, but not impossible.
And if the safety car hadn't happened, do you think the result would have been the same?
Nico would have been right up behind Lewis. Lewis would have been on the harder compound pushing hard. I think the reality behind it is that Nico did have really good pace in that race. First stint, you can definitely see that Lewis struggled to keep the tyre alive as long as Nico did. Nico, despite following about a second and a half behind, that was an intended plan, was able to close right up on that lap 18 and even make a move on Lewis. In terms of where the cars would have been at the end of the race, Nico, I think, had just a little bit of performance, and Lewis in that middle stint of the race managed it to not build the gap too far. But ultimately, you saw a more powerful effect with the safety car bringing them together and Nico not making it through. So I think the reality is, would Nico have won? More than likely not.
Well, it was exciting to watch anyway. And Raz Al-Haddad asks what the engine modes issue was between the drivers in the last 10 laps.
So, I mean, sometimes we race with the cars in a lower power mode. But one of the problems at Bahrain is there's so many overtaking zones. Synchronizing them to change mode at the same time always leaves you vulnerable to one of them staying in it a bit longer, and it might decide the race result. So when the race resumed after the safety car, there were two things on our mind. One was we didn't want to be interfering to a point that we inadvertently switch the lead because we haven't got them in exactly the same mode at the same time. And the other one was we actually wanted just to build a gap because you never know what's going to happen. It is possible to lose races from the front if you're being overly conservative. So we were keen just to get on and build a race. So what we'd said to the engineers and they convey to the drivers is that they can use all the engine power that's available, but what they're free to manage is the mode that they're in terms of the harvesting and the deployment, so the energy mode. And what you could hear going on there was actually the drivers asking what mode the other guy was in. And again, it was early days of us understanding these power units, learning how to race them. And back then, the drivers needed a bit more support from us to manage their energy levels, whereas now it's almost second nature to them. And we let them pretty much decide all race whether they're charging the pack up or they're deploying it to attack. But the only difference between the two was that deployment and harvesting levels.
Right, I like this question in from Ro Mason, asking if you can take your engineering and technical hats off and look at footage and just enjoy it as a fan, the hardball racing, or can't you see it in that way? Does your expertise always get in the way?
It's a good question. The reality behind it is that we have a passion for the sport that we do. I'm missing it terribly now. This is very unusual for me to be, and Shov and all of the race team really to that respect, being stationary for this long. And we love the sport that we do. We love the racing, the excitement, the build-up, etc. We get adrenaline rushes the same way you will when you're watching at home. We still, though, have to, as Shov says, bring the cars home in the best positions possible. We have a responsibility and a duty to do that. That is our job. And we need to maintain focus on that all the way through as a technical expert. And what it means is that you don't feel any less emotion for winning. I love it today as much as I did the first race that I won with Shov. But what you have to do is make sure that you don't get carried away with the enjoyment of it and forget perhaps your responsibilities. If I watch the Bahrain race now, which I did in preparation for this, I enjoy it. I mean, it was an incredible race. Perhaps not all of it actually captured on footage, but there was manoeuvres at the start of the race with Nico being on pole, being overtaken by Lewis, the two of them really just duking it out, but fairly. Again, as we get towards the first stop, that lap 18, you can see Nico now on better tyres, coming back, fighting back at Lewis. You can see the build-up of tension that's going to happen all the way through the race. Nico was doing that on purpose. The earlier you force Lewis in, or even if you can take the lead, you gain the advantage. Did that perfectly. And as you get towards the end of the race, with that safety car now, you have this huge showdown, this crescendo that you know is about to appear. I remember the feeling at the time. I had sort of goosebumps at the restart because I was concerned and genuinely worried. You had two guys, one that was definitely fast behind, a situation that doesn't happen that often with your own two cars. And you had a number of laps in front of them where anything could happen. And indeed, lap on lap, they were fighting. It never let go. And that feeling maintained all the way through. As I watch the footage now that I know the result, I know we've done our job. I know we've achieved everything we should have achieved. I can relax and enjoy it. But that's not necessarily something that you do at the time.
What about you, Shov? Can you enjoy it when you watch it back?
Yeah, definitely when you watch it back. I think it's not like we're total nerds who only enjoy it for the data and the engineering. We do enjoy the racing. But during a race, sometimes you're actually really busy with either you're trying to understand something that's going on with the tyres and work out whether they'll make the stint length you need. You might be really up against it managing fuel or brakes. James might be, very engrossed in the strategy. And there might be issues on the car that you're worried about whether or not it will make the finish. And what you often find is that really steals your focus. Now, when a race like Bahrain and it restarts, you're not far from the finish. You know the tyres are going to make the end. You know there's enough fuel because the safety cars made that easy. You actually get a point where you haven't got a lot to do, and we're sort of sat there, we've got all the data. But to be honest, by that point, towards the end of the race, you've kind of made all the decisions that you've got to make. And it was one of the few occasions that you can kind of just sit back and you're actually just watching the telly. You're not really looking at the data in the way you're normally good. We're just kind of there with everyone else watching the great racing that's in front of us.
You shared some great data with us right now. What do you do with that data right after a race in the hours that follow and the weeks that follow?
Well, there's quite a lot of work. As you say, we've got telemetry that comes off the car during the race. But actually, when we get the cars back from the FIA after the race, you can download the data properly, and that's all sort of the higher rate data, more information in there. But lots of different groups will go off and look at different things. So we've got a lot of people looking for any issues with any of the systems on the car because, the gearbox, the power unit, the hydraulics, all of those bits might be racing again a week later. And you want to make sure that we haven't missed anything in terms of their health. There's people who'll be analysing the aero data, the tyre data, So it kind of gets broken up into chunks. We all do it, and then we come back together towards the end of the following week, and kind of just discuss what we've learned about what's gone on. And often you'll not even, or you might not look at bits of the data for quite a while, but then you'll have a particular problem that might have you going back and looking at another race to see if there's any clues as to how you can solve it. But it's used in many different ways, essentially trying to make the car faster and more reliable.
And what about bringing the drivers into that review process? How are they kept up to speed with what went on during their race?
Well, the drivers with their engineers will review every race after it's happened before the next one. But what they're looking at there is which are the bits we need to learn about going into a new circuit, and try and make sure they've understood. If you were slower than your teammate in qualifying, why is that? Or if you were quick, why is it? Likewise with race pace. And the engineers work with the drivers in a very open and critical way, where both drivers want to know what they can do better. The big thing that they want is to find out where they can actually improve themselves. But then also, when we go to a track a year later, there'll be a recap of the learnings of that particular circuit, because then you often find a driver might have been always giving up a bit of time in a particular corner, and there'll be, in a case of going back there a year later, can you solve that weakness? Can you get on top of it?
What about after the Bahrain Grand Prix? Was it different? Did you notice anything different between Lewis and Nico in the review?
No, not really. I think the way that they raced, and they were, at that time, they were both just happy to have a car that could fight for wins and could fight for a championship. The year before, we were able to win 3 races, but of the races we won, none of them were easy. And situations where you're in it, you have an opportunity to win a race, were not coming along very frequently. For the drivers, I think that was the biggest sentiment, was, we're privileged to have a car that's this good. We're privileged to be fighting for wins. But as you get into the year, obviously, focus shifts to the championship. And, drivers want to win world championships like nothing else in life. So that pressure that they're under, and that, their inherent desire to win, but the pressure that they're under week in, week out, starts to take a bit of a toll, and it's quite hard to keep a nice environment in the office, to get them to work together as teammates, when you have got that kind of the elephant in the room, where at the end of the day only one guy's going to win.
Do you think the experience you had in Bahrain with Nico and Lewis at that point helped you going forward with how you then managed both of them, and now how you manage Lewis and Valtteri? And that's a good question there from Freya H, saying, how does it feel when 2 teammates are in such close duels?
Managing 2 guys fighting each other for a championship is a very difficult thing to do. It's difficult to get it right all the time. Bahrain helping us, well, it's really just been a journey of discovery. You look at what works and what doesn't. You've got to, work with the drivers and have them understand our issues, where we're trying to run a team. We're trying to keep everyone together. We want to put out cars that are quick enough to win the race week in, week out, and having them work with each other makes that an easier thing to do and a more realistic proposition. But very much it has just been a case of being critical of when we've got it wrong, or critical of ourselves, trying to understand what we can do to get better, and really getting the team that's involved in that at the track and the drivers round the table to have the discussions, and just always looking at trying to improve it. I mean, James may have other points to add on that.
My view's somewhat similar. So we're in a situation here where across the last 5-6 years, we've learned a huge amount from every race. So the same way that we learn about how to improve reliability or performance of the car, we've also learned how to create a structure by which the drivers can work with each other and work with the team, and have a construct and a foundation where they can also race each other fairly. And we've improved that, I would say, every year. It's not every race, but you learn things every few races that you then apply. One of them is certainly that when you've had a problem during the course of the race, you sit down with the drivers and debrief open and honestly, And that's been one of the keys to it. And it's one of the cultural things in Mercedes that I'm incredibly proud of. We're open, nothing's hidden. You talk about it openly, and you make sure that you don't leave without anything being completed and not discussed. And that openness has meant that over time, the drivers have trust and faith that we will always try and create a situation for them to race when it is possible to do so. The championship is under threat, the win is under threat, we can't. But in all other circumstances, we will do our utmost to maintain that.
Well, it was great to see them racing in Bahrain all those years ago. I have to ask you both, what are you most missing about F1? Have you got a lockdown strategy?
Well, it is unusual for us because it's not just the government restrictions. We've got the Formula One shutdown. So we're not actually allowed to work. We can do, bits like this, a bit of marketing work. But essentially, we're not allowed to get the laptops out and look at any car data or communicate with each other about work-related things. So my strategy, well, I'm enjoying a bit of time with the family because I know that as and when the time comes to get racing again, that's going to be in fairly short supply because it sounds like we're going to end up with a very, very busy calendar. And, we all do miss the racing, but the reality is Formula One can't be the priority now. There's other things that are much more important. But the time will come when it is right to start racing again. We'll just wait patiently until that time comes.
One thing I found as a strategy for dealing with this day on day, every day I'm on an internal training bike, essentially. So train in the morning, just wake up with that, get myself back into the spirit of things. And every day I've got a list of things that I just haven't had time to learn across the last 20 years. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be a little bit of programming, a little bit of Photoshop, for example, just bits that I really want to improve on as a personal growth. And every day, as long as I've made a list for a week of what I've done and look back at it and think I've achieved, I'm happy. As Shov says, it's an odd situation for us because we can't really work at all. And so you have to find ways of improving and growing. And the main way is sport. So at the moment, I'm hoping that by the time we get back to this, I'll be fitter than I have been before, because Shov was on a serious winter training program and I have to catch him back up.
How's your winter training program going? It's been extended through to spring now.
I've been building a very big fence for the last few weeks. So I think if it comes to soaring and hammering, I'll win. But if it's cycling and running, I might not. I'm nearly finished. It's good. We're getting there with it.
All skills are needed. That is brilliant. But you're right. When you're someone who's used to having lots of things that they get through each week, lots of tasks, lots of challenges, suddenly without that, it leaves a bit of a black hole in your life, doesn't it?
It's very much that. We are people that run at 1,000 miles an hour continuously. That's how you run your life. And everyone else does around you. You get used to that. You're goal driven, you're driven by performance, you're driven by evaluation of how you're doing. And as Shov said, there's huge bonuses to what this is right now. We're very thankful actually for time, because in 20 years I've never had this. But equally, I need to satisfy the part of me that needs to be growing every week. And I'm finding ways of doing that.
It does teach you how much you miss it. I think how much you miss that team environment, the competitive environment. And when you've not really known anything else your whole working life, it's quite hard to know what it feels like not to have it. But I suppose this has given us that perspective, maybe a bit of a glimpse of what retirement's going to feel like. But from my side, I'm not quite ready yet.
Well, that's good to hear, Shov. I'm glad you're not ready. Perhaps in the meantime, while we wait to go racing again, you can review some more amazing races. But thank you for helping me review the Bahrain Grand Prix from 2014.
Thank you very much. Stay safe. I heard a good bit of advice for the lockdown strategy, which was whatever you do, don't put on jogging pants because you'll like nothing has ever been achieved by anyone wearing jogging pants.
Jogging pants, Shov. The thought of you wearing jogging pants, the world will be coming to an end if I see you in jogging pants.
No, we've got jeans on today.
Phew.